Why did everyone stop talking when she walked through the gate? $50 says she doesn't make it past the briefing. The voice carried easily through the hot California air, drifting across the compound like a challenge disguised as humor. Another answered, louder, I'll take that bet. My money's on a medical withdrawal by day 3. The gate clanged shut behind her, steel against steel. Lieutenant Hayes didn't flinch. Her boots struck the cracked asphalt with that steady rhythm only a soldier learned to maintain, one step for discipline, one for dignity. She learned long ago that silence was the sharpest reply to doubt. The Naval Special Warfare Training Facility sat 20 miles inland, a sprawl of weathered concrete and sun-bleached barracks surrounded by ranges that stretched into brown hills. The air was dry, heavy with the smell of dust and gunpowder and something else, pride maybe, or tension. Every step toward the operations building carried the weight of what she already knew. They didn't want her here, not really. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed, too bright for early morning. Commander Nathan Vickers stood behind a steel desk, her personnel file open like a question he already thought he knew the answer to. He was older, gray threading through close-cropped hair, skin that told stories of decades under unforgiving suns. 3 instructors flanked him against the wall, arms crossed, expressions locked in that professional skepticism she'd seen 100 times. The kind that said, "You don't belong here." "Lieutenant Hayes," Vickers began, letting her rank hang in the air as if testing how it sounded coming from his mouth. "I've reviewed your record. I'll be frank, this facility maintains a 92% washout rate, even among elite candidates. Men with years of field experience struggle to meet the standard." He closed the file slowly, deliberately. "The course you're here to attempt requires engaging 14 targets across varied terrain under strict time and precision constraints. In the last year, 47 operators tried. 12 finished, none under 8 minutes. The silence that followed wasn't accidental. He wanted those numbers to sink in. Hayes kept her gaze level, her voice calm. "I understand, sir." The Master Chief standing behind him gave a faint shake of his head. Another instructor, young, scarred, the kind who smirked without moving his lips, checked his watch. The message was clear. "We've seen this movie before." Vickers' tone softened, just a fraction. "Are you certain you want to proceed with this evaluation, Lieutenant? There's no shame in recognizing your limits." "I'm ready to proceed, sir." A faint, almost invisible pause. The commander studied her face, looking for doubt and finding none. "Very well. Chief Morrison will get you processed. You'll review course materials tonight. Full briefing at 600. I strongly suggest you use this evening to reconsider whether this is truly the path you want to take." She saluted crisp. "Understood, sir." Outside, the corridor buzzed with footsteps and muffled voices. Morrison led the way, stocky, hard edges in every movement, a man who'd stopped being surprised by anything years ago. "This way, Lieutenant," he said, tone clipped, professional. Not friendly, not hostile, just resigned. As they crossed the compound, conversation drifted from the ready rooms. "Think she'll even show up tomorrow?" "If she does, give her 20 minutes before she taps out." Morrison didn't answer, but his shoulders tightened. That was enough. The afternoon heat clung like armor as they reached the barracks, a row of cinder-block rooms that smelled faintly of bleach and dust. Morrison handed her a key and a folder. "Chow's at 1800, briefing at 600, maps in the file, get some rest." She nodded, "Thank you, Chief." When the door shut, the silence felt heavy, almost personal. She dropped her gear on the bed, opened the folder, and unfolded the map of the 14-target course. 2 pages of lines, numbers, and annotated distances. Each target position carried its own set of engagement rules, time constraints, and movement requirements. It looked more like an equation than a shooting drill. She studied it like a problem she meant to solve, not survive. Every angle, every transition, she didn't see obstacles. She saw rhythm, timing, flow, cadence. Outside, laughter cut through the quiet. Someone else had made a bet. Dawn came cold and colorless, the kind of morning where the breath turns white, even in California. She was awake before reveille, dressed, laced, and waiting. At 5:30, the loudspeakers blared the day to life. By the time others stirred, she was already walking toward the chow hall, coffee steam curling into the chilled air, the rising sun painting the sky in muted amber. Inside, conversation flickered around her like static. Target 3's where she'll fail. Too generous, too. That angle shift eats people alive. She won't even get there. Protocol bust by the first target. She ate quietly, eyes on her tray. Bland eggs, bitter coffee, enough fuel to last. The words didn't touch her. They only confirmed the world she'd learned to operate within. The one where respect wasn't given. It was earned through quiet defiance. At 5:50, Morrison appeared at the entrance. Lieutenant Hayes, Operations Building, Room 3. She rose. Conversations paused just long enough to follow her with their eyes. The sun broke the horizon as she crossed the yard. Shadows stretched long behind her. The wind was cool but smelled faintly of powder. Inside, Room 3 looked like every other military briefing room she'd been in: stale air, gray paint, a faint hum from the projector. Commander Vickers stood at the head of the table with 4 instructors beside him. The 3D rendering of the 14-target course rotated slowly on the screen. He gestured, "Lieutenant Hayes, sit." The chairs scraped the floor as she took her place. On screen, the course unfolded in sterile detail. 14 numbered silhouettes, marked by obstacles, terrain shifts, and elevation changes. "As I mentioned," Vickers said, "completion rate 25% among qualified candidates. Average time 9 minutes 40 seconds. Record 7:51. That record was set by a SEAL Team 6 operator with 12 years in the field." The Master Chief stepped forward. "Each target has a 3-second engagement window. Miss it, you're out. Miss the target, you're out. Break protocol, same result. This course doesn't test endurance. It finds your breaking point. Everyone has one." His voice carried the conviction of experience. He believed that last line. He'd seen it proven too many times. Vickers continued, tapping through slides. Targets 1 through 8 test fundamentals. After that, fatigue and stress take over. Target 12, he paused, letting the image expand, has ended more attempts than any other. By target 14, most candidates are spent, mentally and physically. He leaned back. "Lieutenant, this is your last chance to reconsider. Declining won't hurt your record, proceeding might." She studied the rotating diagram again, then met his eyes. "I'm ready to attempt the course, sir." The air seemed to thicken. A sharp exhale from the scarred instructor broke it. He smirked. "Your call." Vickers shut the laptop. "Very well. Chief Morrison will walk you through the range layout. Live evaluation begins at 800. She stood, saluted, and followed Morrison out into the sun. The range sprawled across the brown hills, a brutal labyrinth of obstacles, barriers, and shifting terrain. From a distance it looked manageable. Up close, it was a different world. Every path, every structure had been built to test endurance, precision, and the breaking point between discipline and panic. Morrison led her across the ground with the practiced tone of someone who'd done this more times than he cared to count. Target 1, standard engagement 75 meters, then up that berm to position 2. You've got 15 seconds to transition. Target appears for 3. He didn't sugarcoat it. He didn't need to. Hayes listened, memorizing everything. Wind direction, sun angle, distance between covers. Behind them she noticed the observation tower, its glass windows glinting like watchful eyes. A few silhouettes already lingered inside. Instructors, maybe even betters. By the time they reached the final position, she could hear the faint hum of conversation from the tower. Morrison checked his watch. 28 minutes, 2 to spare. Any questions? She shook her head. The walk back was silent. Dust clung to her boots. The tower windows were fuller now, dozens of faces ready to witness another failure. At the armory, the Master Chief waited. Standard M4 facility specs, 3 mags, 30 rounds each. His tone had softened just slightly. He watched her check the rifle, swift, confident movements, no wasted motion. Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of reluctant respect, but it vanished as quickly as it came. She signed the paperwork. He handed her the weapon. Range line, Lieutenant, they're waiting. By 800, the sun had turned harsh. Heat shimmered over the range. The observation tower was packed. Officers, instructors, candidates, all drawn by the same curiosity, to see how long she'd last. Vickers stood at the firing line beside a civilian contractor operating a tablet connected to the core sensors. "Lieutenant Hayes," he said, voice loud enough to carry to the tower. "Once you fire your first shot, time begins. You may engage at your discretion. Are you prepared?" "Yes, sir." From somewhere behind the glass came a voice. 5 minutes. She won't last 5. Laughter followed. Vickers ignored it. Load and make ready. Hayes inserted the magazine, charged the weapon, checked the chamber. The rifle settled into her grip like it belonged there. She took position behind the concrete barrier. Target 1, a black silhouette 75 meters out, waited under the rising sun. Wind brushed across her cheek. 40 eyes watched from behind glass. She exhaled once, steady, the sound lost in the silence that had fallen over the range. And then, her finger moved. The first shot cracked through the air like a verdict. Target 1, center mass. The second shot followed before the echo faded. Target 1, threat eliminated, she called, voice clear, steady. 34 seconds. The tablet beeped, time logged. Without hesitation, she broke position, sprinting toward the berm. The rifle stayed tight against her body, movements fluid, precise, efficient. Dust rose behind her boots as the crowd in the tower leaned forward. The second target popped up at the crest. She raised her rifle mid-stride, 2 clean shots, center mass again. 1 minute, 18 seconds. In the tower, someone whispered, "Did she just?" Another answered, "That's faster than the record pace." The Master Chief's arms uncrossed. The scarred instructor had moved to the window, his smirk gone. Out on the range, Hayes was already descending the berm, eyes forward, heart steady, not a thought wasted on the disbelief gathering behind the glass. There was no sound now but wind and rhythm, her breathing, her boots, the mechanical truth of skill meeting expectation. She wasn't here to prove them wrong. She was here to prove something quieter. That strength didn't always shout. Sometimes it simply acted. Why was the range so silent now? 50 people were watching, yet all sound had drained away except the soft crunch of her boots and the faint metallic hum of the wind against steel. Lieutenant Hayes moved toward position 3 like someone tracing a memory, fluid, precise, utterly certain. The next target waited 120 meters away, elevated 15 degrees, crosswind from the left quarter. The kind of shot that punished hesitation. She climbed the platform ladder without slowing. Her heartbeat was steady, her mind quiet. When the target appeared, she read the wind like a second language, adjusted half a click and squeezed. 2 cracks. 2 holes through center mass. Target 3, threat eliminated. The contractor's tablet chirped again. 2 minutes, 6 seconds. In the tower, disbelief began to whisper between the rows of uniforms. She's 38 seconds ahead of record pace. No one answered. The Master Chief leaned closer to the glass, arms falling from their folded stance. The scarred instructor's smirk had dissolved into a flat, searching stare. Out on the range, Hayes was already moving. The berm dropped into open ground and a drainage ditch cut the course in half. She hit the dirt, rolled, came up prone, muzzle forward, movement so smooth it looked rehearsed by instinct rather than practice. Target 4 appeared through a narrow gap in concrete. Most candidates missed here. The visibility forced them to rush. She didn't rush. She breathed. 2 shots through the gap, the sound folding into the desert like punctuation marks at the end of a statement. Target 4, threat eliminated, 2 minutes 51. The voices in the tower had gone from amused to analytical. Someone murmured, that's not possible. Another answered softly, maybe she's just having a good start. But the Master Chief said nothing. He was watching posture, not time, looking for the micro-tremors that gave away fatigue. There were none. Hayes sprinted toward position 5, the sun climbing, heat shimmer dancing off the range. Sweat rolled down her temple, caught in her collar. She ignored it. Her focus tunneled into the geometry of movement, the rhythm between ground and breath. Position 5 required firing through a vehicle frame, glass deflection, angle shift. She calculated in a blink, fired 2 rounds, both landing clean. 40 seconds later, position 6 fell. Then 7. The rhythm had become something else now, something hypnotic. 4 minutes 33 seconds. The tower was silent again, but not from arrogance this time, from awe. Commander Vickers stood stiffly, eyes locked on the woman who had somehow turned the facility's most punishing gauntlet into a dance of control. "Sir," the Master Chief said quietly, "she's nearly 3 minutes ahead of record pace. Not one violation, not one miss." Vickers didn't answer. He was watching the way she moved, how every transition flowed without wasted motion. She wasn't fighting the course, she was translating it. Downrange, Hayes crossed the ditch again toward position 8. Random target appearances, unpredictable timing, designed to break rhythm, force panic. She waited still as the wall that hid her. The target popped. 2 shots, immediate, perfect. 5 minutes 19 seconds. Someone in the tower whispered, "That's impossible." The word carried like a confession. They were watching more than skill now. They were watching a truth they didn't want to name. The desert heat thickened. The smell of powder hung heavy. Hayes's breath came measured, each exhale a soft count in her head. 1, 2. Position 9 loomed ahead. The offset barrier, the awkward angle, the shot that punished overthinking. She slipped around the cover, sighted through the sliver of space, and pressed the trigger twice. Target 9, threat eliminated. 6 minutes 4 seconds. Behind glass, bodies leaned forward, eyes wide. No one spoke now. Even bets were forgotten. The scarred instructor muttered under his breath, "She's rewriting the course." Position 10 waited downrange at a shallow ravine. 140 meters, downhill angle, gravity compensation. She reached the elevated platform, dropped to a knee, adjusted for drop and wind in a single breath. The target rose. 2 shots. Both perfect. Target 10, threat eliminated. 6 minutes 48 seconds. The contractor glanced between the tablet and the commander. "Sir, she's 1 minute 45 seconds ahead of the record through 10. Vickers still didn't move. His jaw was tight. His eyes, though, betrayed something almost like pride, or fear. Fear that the institution he'd spent his life defending might be smaller than the person standing on that range. The Master Chief finally spoke. "She's faster than the SEAL Team 6 operator, and she's not even breathing hard." No one replied. The truth didn't need echo. Hayes shifted toward position 11, uneven ground scattered with obstacles meant to sap energy. Her boots found every step cleanly, rifle steady. The target hid behind a vehicle frame, visible through a hand-width gap. She dropped to one knee, exhaled, fired twice. Target 11, threat eliminated. 7 minutes 26 seconds. A senior chief who'd arrived late stared at the display. "Someone tell me what I'm looking at." "You're looking at someone who just broke every rule we believed in," the captain beside him answered. "She's not just fast, she's perfect." Position 12 waited like a trap. Everyone in that tower knew it. A shifting platform, unstable footing, 160 meters distance. It broke even seasoned operators. The deck tilted under her boots as she climbed onto it. For the first time, her body wavered, not from fatigue but from calibration. She closed her eyes for half a second, feeling the rhythm of the sway under her soles. Up, down, left, right, a heartbeat made of steel. When the target appeared, she didn't rush. She waited for that breath where platform motion and human rhythm crossed. Then two shots cut the air, sharp and decisive. Target 12, threat eliminated, 8 minutes 9 seconds. The tower erupted, voices overlapping. She timed the rhythm. That's advanced sniper technique. Where the hell did she learn that? Vickers raised a hand. Silence fell again. Let her finish. 2 targets left. She felt the weight now, not exhaustion but awareness. The knowledge that the range had gone from test to witness. She moved to 13, 8 seconds between positions, no stumble, no hesitation. 2 shots, clean. 8 minutes 37. Then the last, 100 meters standing, no support. The simplest in theory, cruelest in timing. She inhaled slowly, tasting the dust and the disbelief hanging in the air. 2 shots. Both true. Target 14, threat eliminated. 8 minutes 52 seconds. For 3 full seconds, no one breathed. The desert wind was the only sound, brushing against metal and skin. Then the contractor whispered, 14 targets, 0 misses, 0 violations. Record beaten by 2 minutes 59. The Master Chief's mouth parted. The scarred instructor pressed both palms against the glass like he needed something solid to hold him upright. Vickers closed his eyes once, just once, as if he were sealing the moment into memory. On the range, Hayes lowered her rifle, safed it, and stood still. Her breathing slowed until it matched the quiet. Sweat traced her temple, but her eyes stayed calm, almost detached. She wasn't celebrating, she was simply done. Vickers descended the tower, each bootstep echoing down the metal stairs. The others followed behind, drawn by gravity they didn't question. By the time they reached the line, nearly every instructor and candidate had gathered, an unspoken assembly pulled by the sound of impossible proof. Hayes stood at parade rest, weapon cleared, gaze forward. "Lieutenant Hayes," Vickers said, voice carrying across the range. "Official course time, 8 minutes 52 seconds. 14 targets engaged, 14 eliminated. 0 protocol or safety violations." He paused, the silence stretching long enough to let the words settle into every listener. "Previous record, 7:51. You have surpassed it by 2 minutes 59. The Master Chief cleared his throat. "Lieutenant, I need to verify your service record. Your file shows only standard qualifications. Nothing that explains this." She met his gaze. "My file is accurate, Master Chief." The scarred instructor stepped forward. "Then someone needs to explain how standard produces this. Where did you train?" Her answer was simple. Multiple deployments, various theaters, the kind of training that doesn't always appear in records. The contractor still stared at his tablet. "Sir, I've rechecked every sensor, every time code, it's real." A captain spoke quietly, "Then it's not the rifle." "No," the Master Chief said, "it's the operator." Around them, whispers moved through the crowd like wind through dry grass. "Did you see her transitions? She beat the record by 3 minutes. Who is she?" Vickers turned to the assembly. "This evaluation is complete. The performance was legitimate, witnessed, and verified." His gaze lingered on the few who had been loudest in their doubt. "Professional behavior will be maintained. Understood." No one dared answer anything but silence. As the others dispersed, Hayes stood where she'd finished, staring at the targets lined across the sun-baked hills. The wind carried a faint metallic rattle from the tower above. The commander approached. His expression had softened, the weight of authority replaced by something more human. "Lieutenant, I owe you an apology. I made assumptions yesterday that were wrong." She looked at him. "You made the assumptions everyone makes, sir. I'm used to it." "Doesn't make it right," he said. He extended a hand. "That was the most impressive tactical performance I've seen in 25 years." She accepted the handshake. "Thank you, sir." The Master Chief stepped closer, the lines around his eyes deeper now but carrying a hint of respect. "Lieutenant, I'd like to buy you a beer when this day ends, because I need to understand how someone beats our best by 3 minutes." Her reply was quiet. "Maybe I just stopped believing in limits other people set for me." For a moment, even the desert seemed to listen. That night, the range lights burned long after the last shot had echoed. Inside the debriefing room, fluorescent buzz replaced gunfire. Files lay open, screens glowed with data, and men who had doubted now sat leaning forward, studying every line of her record like it might reveal a secret. Vickers began softly, almost reflective. 3 deployments, standard infantry attachments, nothing exceptional on paper, yet you did this. Hayes took a slow sip of water before answering. "Paper doesn't always tell the story that matters, sir." No one interrupted. The scarred instructor, now silent at the door, looked at her as though watching gravity behave differently. And for the first time in years, within those concrete walls built to measure strength, someone realized the obvious truth they'd all overlooked. Greatness doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it walks in quietly, endures the bets and the whispers, and then lets the results speak louder than any defense ever could. How do you explain something that doesn't fit the system built to measure you? That was the unspoken question in the debriefing room, the one that hung between the hum of fluorescent lights and the quiet rustle of paperwork. Lieutenant Hayes sat across from Commander Vickers, posture straight, eyes steady. Around her were men who, 12 hours earlier, had dismissed her without a second thought. Now they were studying her like a riddle that refused to solve itself. The room was small, cold, unadorned, just concrete, metal, and tension. A half-empty bottle of water sat on the table before her, its condensation forming a ring that kept widening as minutes dragged on. Lieutenant Commander Garrison was the first to break the silence. His voice was calm, but his eyes weren't. "Your file lists 3 deployments, infantry support, standard marksmanship scores, no specialized courses, nothing to suggest whatever we saw out there." She didn't look away. "My file is accurate, sir." The Master Chief leaned forward, elbows on the table, his tone caught between frustration and awe. "Accurate doesn't mean complete. We both know that. You shot like a Tier 1 operator out there. Better, maybe. That kind of precision, that calm, it doesn't come from a manual. So where did you learn it?" Hayes took a breath, slow, quiet. Her voice carried no defensiveness. "Some of it came from training, some from experience, the rest from necessity." "Necessity," Vickers repeated, leaning back. "That's vague, Lieutenant." She nodded slightly. "Because the situations that teach you the most aren't always the ones that make it into reports." For a moment, the only sound was the low hum of the air conditioning. Finally, she continued. "During my second deployment, our forward base hosted rotating elements, SEALs, Green Berets, Marine Raiders. I was the liaison officer. Coordination, logistics, comms. But when you're isolated in a small outpost surrounded by hostiles, job descriptions start to blur." The Master Chief folded his arms, skeptical but listening. "You trained with them." "I learned from them," she said simply. "We had a SEAL sniper instructor attached for a while, Master Chief Petty Officer. He taught informal sessions after hours. Whoever wanted to learn, learned. I volunteered every night." Vickers glanced at Garrison, then back at her. "How long?" 6 months. Then another 4 when we crossed paths again on a later rotation. He believed in teaching without shortcuts. Breath, timing, rhythm, movement under fire. He said I had a gift for control. Garrison frowned. A gift. She smiled faintly, almost as if remembering his exact words. He said I didn't fight the rifle. Most people do. They try to control it. I listened to it instead. The scarred instructor, silent until now, spoke from near the door. And you think that's all it takes to outperform elite operators? 10 months of informal instruction. No, she said, but it was enough to learn what to value: patience, discipline, consistency. Most shooters chase speed. He taught me stillness. Her answer wasn't rehearsed. It was honest in a way that made even disbelief feel out of place. Vickers watched her quietly. So when you came here, you knew you could beat the course? She shook her head. No, sir, I knew I could complete it. Beating it wasn't the goal. Surviving it with discipline was. The Master Chief exhaled through his nose, like a man who'd spent a lifetime believing excellence had rules, and was now realizing maybe it didn't. Lieutenant, he said, his voice softer now, what we witnessed wasn't luck or chance. You didn't just succeed, you changed the standard. That's not something command can ignore. Garrison looked down at the open laptop in front of him, scrolling through her file one more time as though expecting hidden pages to appear. You've been buried in administrative work the last 2 years, he said. Why? She hesitated, and for the first time, the steel in her voice gave way to something quieter. Because I stopped asking to prove myself. That made Vickers pause, stopped asking. She met his eyes. Every time I pushed for combat evaluations, someone decided I wasn't the right fit. Too valuable elsewhere, too organized, too calm, so I stopped pushing. I figured the system would notice eventually. A long silence followed. Then she added, almost under her breath, it never did. The Master Chief shifted, uncomfortable. Garrison closed the laptop. Well, Lieutenant, it noticed now. Outside, the desert was beginning to cool. The last traces of sunset were dissolving behind the hills, painting the horizon in faded orange. Inside, something quieter had shifted. The hierarchy of assumption had fractured. Vickers folded his hands, choosing his words carefully. We'll need to document today's events, not just the performance but the context. Your training background, any informal instruction, everything. Commands higher up will want answers. She nodded, understood. But I'll tell you something, the Master Chief said, standing slowly. Whatever we write down won't explain it, because you can't write instinct into a report. She looked up at him. Instinct comes from experience, Chief, nothing mystical about it. He almost smiled. Maybe, but I've seen hundreds of shooters under stress. None of them look like you did out there. That wasn't training, that was something deeper. The scarred instructor, Chun, she finally caught his name, spoke up again, this time without edge. Then maybe it's time we learned it. Vickers turned toward him. Meaning? Meaning, Chun said. We could spend months teaching candidates to move faster, shoot straighter, breathe better. Or we could ask her how she makes it look effortless. The suggestion hung there, simple and undeniable. Vickers finally nodded. Lieutenant Hayes, tomorrow morning you'll assist the instructors on the range, observe candidate drills, offer feedback where appropriate. She blinked. You want me to teach? I want you to share what you know, he said. You've proven capability, now show us how it's done. She hesitated for only a breath. Yes, sir. The next morning broke sharp and clear. The California sun was already creeping over the horizon when she stepped out onto the gravel. Her boots left faint prints in the dust, leading toward the range where candidates were already lining up for qualification drills. Chun met her near the observation rail, clipboard in hand. Morning, Lieutenant. These are the same candidates who were betting against you 2 days ago. Hayes smiled faintly. Then we should give them something better to talk about. He chuckled, nodding toward a corporal struggling with a 200-meter target. That one's been missing all morning. Fundamentals are fine, but he's fighting the rifle. She watched for a few seconds, then called out, "Corporal Diaz." He froze mid-reload, startled. "Ma'am." "Show me your natural stance," she said, walking toward him. The chatter along the firing line quieted. Everyone watched. Diaz squared up, bringing his rifle to shoulder. Hayes circled him once, her tone calm but direct. "You're trying too hard. You're tightening every muscle to control something that doesn't need controlling." He frowned, uncertain. "Ma'am." She gestured with her own weapon. "Relax your shoulders. Let the rifle settle into you, not against you. It's not a fight, it's a rhythm." He adjusted, slow and awkward. She nodded. "Better. Now breathe. You're holding it too long. Fire at the pause between breaths." He squeezed. The shot rang out, hitting center mass. His second followed, then his third. All three grouped tight. His eyes widened. "That's the first time I've hit that clean at 200 meters." She smiled. "Now you know what it feels like when you stop fighting yourself." Behind the observation rail, the instructors exchanged glances. Morrison murmured, "She's not just teaching, she's translating." For the next hour she moved along the line, quiet corrections, small adjustments. A sergeant rushing his trigger pull, a petty officer overcompensating for wind, a lieutenant whose nerves made her breathing uneven. Each time, Hayes said little, demonstrated once, and watched the results shift. By mid-morning, every target line showed tighter groupings. Candidates who'd been missing were now hitting. Voices that had carried jokes 2 days ago carried silence now, focused, listening. Commander Vickers arrived halfway through the session. He stood beside Morrison at the rail, arms crossed, watching. "She's a natural instructor," Morrison said. "Identifies problems instantly, fixes them faster." "She's doing in minutes what we usually take weeks to teach," Vickers murmured. When the final round of shots ended, the echoes faded into the hills. Hayes turned from the range. Sweat darkened her collar, but her expression was calm. The candidates lowered their rifles, waiting. "Remember this," she said. "Skill doesn't make you invincible. It just removes excuses. The rest is heart." A few nodded. Others just watched her, silently processing what they'd witnessed. Vickers stepped forward. "Lieutenant Hayes," he called, "join me for a moment." She walked to the observation rail. "I'd like you to conduct a full seminar this afternoon," he said. "Transitions, unstable shooting, breathing, everything you demonstrated, for the entire instructor staff." She hesitated. "Sir, much of what I do is instinctive. Breaking it down may be difficult." Vickers smiled faintly. "Try anyway. Some instincts are worth teaching." That night, alone in her quarters, she sat by the window overlooking the range. The air outside shimmered faintly under floodlights. She could still see the faint outlines of the targets she'd conquered, lined like silent witnesses under the stars. She thought of the old master chief who'd trained her overseas, the one who'd taught her to breathe with the rifle instead of against it. He once told her, "One day you'll meet someone who doubts you completely. When that happens, you won't argue. You'll just show them." She smiled quietly, remembering. He'd been right. In the silence, she realized something deeper. It wasn't about the record. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about becoming the kind of soldier who no longer needed to be seen to know her worth. Sometimes dignity doesn't shout. Sometimes it moves, breathes, aims, and lets the results speak for themselves. Why did recognition feel heavier than silence? The next morning, the air over the range was still. A pale gray dawn stretched across the compound, and somewhere between the humming generators and the soft grind of boots on gravel, Lieutenant Hayes felt the weight of eyes again, not the skeptical ones from before, but expectant, watching, measuring. She walked to the briefing tent, rifle slung low, not out of arrogance but comfort. The weapon was part of her now, as familiar as her own heartbeat. Inside, a dozen instructors waited, Morrison Chun, the scarred one who had smirked 2 days ago, even Commander Vickers standing at the back, arms crossed, expression unreadable. On the board behind her, a white sheet displayed nothing but the title, Advanced Fire Control and Movement Dynamics, Seminar Lead, LT, K. Hayes. She hadn't written that title. Someone else had. Her throat felt dry, but she stepped forward anyway. "Morning, everyone," she began. Her voice carried the calm of someone who'd stopped fearing judgment. "Commander asked me to walk you through some of the techniques I use in live conditions: breathing control, transition timing, movement under duress." A few heads nodded. Some arms crossed, waiting to see if she'd deliver or crack. She looked down at her notes. They were blank. So she spoke from memory instead. "Most shooters," she said, "spend their whole lives chasing control. They try to dominate the rifle, but control is a myth. The rifle isn't a thing to be mastered, it's a partner. You move, it moves. You breathe, it breathes. When you stop fighting it, everything becomes simpler." Chun muttered to Morrison, "She's turning marksmanship into poetry." Morrison didn't smile. "Maybe poetry, what we've been missing." Hayes continued, gesturing to the range map. "When you move between targets, don't think of it as distance. Think of it as rhythm. I time my steps to breath. 3 strides per inhale, 2 per exhale. It stabilizes oxygen flow and prevents adrenaline from hijacking your control." The scarred instructor raised a brow. "You actually count your breaths?" "Every one," she said. "Not consciously, it becomes habit. It's how you turn chaos into sequence." Morrison's gaze sharpened. "You trained that deliberately?" She nodded. "During my 3rd deployment. We were pinned for 9 hours once, low on ammo, 3 of us holding off 40 hostiles. Breathing was all we had to keep our hands from shaking." Her tone didn't dramatize it. She spoke like she was describing weather. But the room quieted anyway. "Show us," Chun said. She walked to the firing lane, adjusted her stance, rifle up. "Normal shooter breathing. Inhale, exhale, hold, fire," she demonstrated. The barrel dipped slightly at the pause. "Now rhythmic breathing, 3 strides per inhale, 2 per exhale." She mimed movement, then fired again. The barrel didn't shift. 1 target, 2, 3, all dead center. The silence afterward wasn't just admiration, it was recalibration, the sound of paradigms cracking. She set the rifle down gently. "Control comes from acceptance, not domination." Vickers stepped closer, voice calm. "That's a line worth remembering." She gave a small smile. "Heard it once from someone smarter than me." He looked at her. "I doubt that." By midday, she had the instructors rotating through drills. Hayes observed quietly, correcting only when needed. Chun misjudged a transition. She was beside him before he even reset his stance. "You're shifting your center too early," she said softly. "Let your upper body settle first." He repeated the motion. This time it clicked. "Better," she said. "You're fighting balance. Stop trying to control it, feel where it wants to be." He nodded once, wordless. Around them the desert sun climbed. Heat waves shimmered above the range. Voices that once doubted now asked questions, real ones, technical ones. Morrison leaned in between drills. "Lieutenant, you ever think of instructing full-time?" She shrugged. "Never thought I'd be allowed to." He grinned faintly. "After this week, they might build a program around you." She looked away. "That's not why I'm here." "I know," he said, "but sometimes the people least hungry for command make the best leaders." The line hit something deep. She didn't answer. That afternoon, Vickers requested a private conversation. They met in his office, the window behind him overlooking the range. Targets glinted in the sunlight like fragments of a distant memory. "You've done something remarkable, Lieutenant," he said. "Not just the course, the aftermath. The instructors, hell, even the candidates, are watching you like you've rewritten what's possible." She stood at ease. "Respectfully, sir, they're just seeing what was always possible." He smiled slightly. "Maybe so, but it takes one person to make others believe it." She hesitated. "Belief isn't the hard part, endurance is." He leaned forward. You've been through a lot, haven't you? Her eyes flicked to the window, enough to know that attention can be dangerous. He studied her quietly. You don't like recognition. It distracts, she said. Makes people expect perfection, and perfection isn't sustainable. He nodded slowly. Still, the Navy loves a symbol. They want to use this story. She turned her gaze back to him. Then let them use the numbers, not my name. Why? Because the numbers don't bleed. For a moment neither spoke. Vickers' expression softened with understanding. Understood. He rose, offered his hand. For what it's worth, Lieutenant, I'm proud to have been proven wrong. She took his hand, grip firm. For what it's worth, sir, I'm glad you were. Evening brought a softer light to the range. Training had ended, but she stayed behind, walking between the lanes where empty casings gleamed like scattered brass confetti. She picked one up, rolling it between her fingers, the metal still warm from sun and memory. She thought about the day's faces, men who'd once doubted her now asking questions like students, not skeptics. The shift felt strange, almost fragile. Respect earned through silence was harder to keep than respect demanded through rank. A shadow fell across the dirt. Morrison approached, holding 2 bottles of water. He handed her one. You still out here thinking? She smiled faintly. You could say that. He leaned against the barrier beside her. You changed something today. Or maybe just reminded them. Reminded them of what? That skill doesn't care about gender, or doubt, or rank. He nodded. You're right, but that doesn't make it easier. You're under a spotlight now. They'll want to test you again. I know, she said. That's what they do when they can't explain something. They test it until it breaks. He studied her for a long moment. And will you? Her answer came soft, almost like a confession. Everyone breaks, Chief. The trick is to break quietly where no one can see it. He didn't press, just nodded, understanding the kind of truth that came from scars, not speeches. The next few days unfolded like ripples from a stone thrown into calm water. Candidates started quoting her lines. Instructors began rewriting lesson plans. Even the old master chief from logistics, gruff, skeptical, started implementing her breathing cadence into sniper evaluations. She didn't seek attention, but it found her anyway. Command messages circulated. Requests for consultation came from other bases. A colonel wanted to observe her training methods personally. One evening, while reviewing range data in her quarters, she received a sealed envelope, orders stamped with the Navy crest. Special evaluation, Pacific Command Joint Task Assignment Subject, Lieutenant Catherine Hayes. She read the lines twice. It wasn't a demotion. It wasn't punishment. It was interest. The kind that came from people high enough to make careers or end them. Vickers knocked lightly on her door. You got them. She nodded just now. He stepped inside. You've stirred up attention in D.C. They want to meet the woman who did what no one else could. She set the envelope down. That's not always a good thing. I know, he said, but it's an opportunity. She looked out the window. The range lights burned faintly against the dark. I didn't do this for opportunity. I know that too, Vickers said. But maybe that's why they need you. Most of what's left of honor in this world is found in people who don't chase it. She didn't respond. The silence stretched thick with meaning. Finally, he added, you'll leave in 48 hours. Until then, rest. You've earned it. He turned to leave but paused at the door. Lieutenant. Yes, sir. Whatever they ask of you next, remember who you were before all this. That's the part they can't take. She nodded, understood. When he was gone, she sat in the quiet for a long time, the envelope still on the table. The weight of it wasn't in the paper, it was in the expectation. She thought of all the voices she'd heard since the first day. The laughter, the doubt, the silence that followed her first shot, and then the one voice that never left her, the old sniper's lesson whispered like a prayer. Don't prove them wrong, just prove yourself right. She closed her eyes, feeling the pulse of that truth settle inside her. The next morning she walked the range one last time before departure. The sun climbed over the hills, soft and golden, painting everything in long shadows. Targets stood silent, holes still visible from her historic run. She stopped at position 12, the unstable platform that had broken so many before her. She climbed it again, stood still, feeling the sway beneath her boots. For a moment she was back there, 8 minutes into the course, wind in her face, balance trembling underfoot, knowing every eye doubted her. And then she remembered why she hadn't rushed, why she'd waited for the perfect moment to fire. It wasn't about hitting the target. It was about listening to the rhythm between chaos and calm. The platform shifted under her again, and she whispered to no one but the wind, "Stillness doesn't mean weakness." The words carried into the open air, vanishing somewhere beyond the hills. Then she climbed down, shouldered her rifle, and walked away without looking back. Because she didn't need to. Why did every victory come wrapped in another test? The C-130 banked over the Pacific, its engines humming like distant thunder. Through the small porthole window, Lieutenant Hayes watched the endless water below, blue, shifting, indifferent. She hadn't slept much on the flight. Recognition had replaced exhaustion, and recognition, she'd learned, was rarely a reward. When the aircraft touched down on the tarmac at Pearl Harbor Naval Base, the air felt different, thicker, heavier, carrying the scent of salt and fuel. She stepped down the ramp, duffel slung over her shoulder, and was met by an officer in crisp whites holding a clipboard. "Lieutenant Catherine Hayes." "Yes, sir." "Welcome to Pacific Command. Follow me, please." The walk from the runway to the command building was short but deliberate. Every salute, every passing glance carried a strange mix of curiosity and caution. By now, the story of her range test had traveled further than she'd wanted. She stopped counting how many times she'd heard whispers about the woman who beat the SEALs. Inside, the corridors were sterile, gray walls, fluorescent lights, the faint hum of air conditioning. She was led into a conference room that smelled faintly of coffee and tension. 3 officers waited at the table. Rear Admiral Connors sat at the center, his posture straight as a ruler, silver hair precise, eyes sharper than rank. To his right, a civilian defense liaison, judging by the badge scrolled through a tablet. To his left, a commander she didn't recognize, younger, watchful. "Lieutenant Hayes," Connors said as she entered. "At ease, sit." She took the seat opposite him. He studied her file for a moment before speaking. "You've created quite a stir, Lieutenant. 14 targets, 5 minutes, no misses. Word travels fast when something like that happens." "I didn't intend for it to," she replied quietly. "Intent rarely controls consequence," he said. "Your demonstration has challenged assumptions held for decades. That gets people's attention, both the good kind and the dangerous kind." She met his gaze. "May I ask why I'm here, sir?" He closed the file. "You're here because Command wants to know if what you did was repeatable, or if it was an anomaly." Her tone didn't waver. "It wasn't luck, sir." "I believe you," he said. "But others need proof, which is why you'll be evaluated under controlled conditions. Different environment, new variables, live threat simulation." The civilian spoke up for the first time. "We're developing a new joint training model, integrating Air Force, Marine, and naval assets. They want to know if your methods can apply beyond one discipline." Hayes frowned slightly. "You want to replicate instinct." Connors smiled faintly. "We want to understand it." "And if I refuse?" His smile didn't change. "Then you'll return to your previous assignment, and this opportunity will pass to someone else, someone less qualified perhaps, but more willing." She exhaled slowly. "When does it start?" "Tomorrow, 600. You'll be briefed tonight. You'll have access to an open range and a full team of evaluators. Not your usual spectators, these will be specialists. She nodded once, understood. Good, Connors said, rising, dismissed. As she left the room, the civilian watched her go. When the door shut, he said softly, "She's calm, too calm." Connors replied without looking up, "That's what makes her dangerous." The barracks assigned to her were immaculate, sterile perfection without comfort. On the desk lay a sealed briefing folder. She sat on the edge of the bunk, opened it, and scanned the contents. Scenario evaluation, Crimson Dagger simulation. Objective, neutralize threats in dynamic field environment. Target count, 14. Time allotment, 6 minutes. Her eyes paused, 14 again. Coincidence or something else? Below that, the fine print made her pause. Observers. Joint Task Intelligence Division, Department of Naval Operations, Experimental Warfare Group. She recognized one of those names. The Experimental Warfare Group was known for pushing limits of training, of psychology, of ethics. They studied what broke people, not what built them. She closed the folder. The room felt smaller. Night fell heavy over the base. The ocean wind swept through the palm trees outside, bringing with it the faint scent of diesel and salt. She sat by the window, staring out at the dark runway lights stretching into infinity. Somewhere she could hear distant laughter from the enlisted quarters, a normal sound in an abnormal life. Her reflection in the glass looked unfamiliar. Same uniform, same calm eyes, but there was something in the way she sat, rigid, deliberate, as if bracing for another kind of battle. The knock came at 2300 hours. "Come in." The door opened and a man stepped in wearing civilian clothes, cargo pants, a plain gray shirt, quiet confidence. He was Navy, but he carried himself like someone who'd been one once. "Lieutenant Hayes," he said, "I'm with JTI. Mind if I come in?" She gestured to the chair. "Go ahead." He sat studying her with careful eyes. "My name, Garrett. You'll see me tomorrow in the control booth. My job is to monitor neural and physiological data during your run." "I wasn't told there. Be biometric monitoring." Command added it last minute. "They want to see how your mind performs under pressure, not just your hands." She folded her arms. "That's not training, that's experimentation." He smiled faintly. "You're not wrong." Silence hung for a moment before he added, "Off the record, I've read your after-action reports. You're one of the few who doesn't embellish." "I write what happened," she said. "Exactly. Which is why I'll tell you something the brass won't. This test isn't about replication. It's about limits. They want to know how far they can push you before instinct turns into failure." Her gaze hardened. "And you're okay with that?" He shrugged. "I'm a scientist, Lieutenant. My job isn't to be okay with it, it's to record it." She stood, turning toward the window. "Then record this. If they want failure, they'll have to manufacture it." Garrett smiled softly, standing to leave. "Good luck tomorrow. You're going to need it." "I don't believe in luck," she said without turning. "I know," he replied, closing the door behind him. Dawn arrived fast. The sky was pale, clouds low, wind sharp off the sea. The training compound sat inland, a converted urban simulation zone, concrete structures, shattered vehicles, a mock village built for tactical exercises. 14 targets again. Different arrangement, unpredictable timing, sensors and cameras everywhere. From the observation platform above, officers and technicians gathered. Connors, Garrett, and several unfamiliar faces wearing civilian badges. Hayes stood alone at the start line, rifle at the ready. Garrett's voice came over the intercom. "Lieutenant Hayes, you'll begin on command. All targets are dynamic. Engage in sequence as they appear. You'll have 6 minutes. Firing sensors and vitals are live. Ready." She adjusted her grip. "Ready." Connors gave a nod. "Begin." The first target appeared 50 meters away through a broken window. Her body moved before thought. 2 rounds, down. The second popped from behind a concrete barrier. Wind shifted. She compensated mid-shot, instinctive, fluid. Third, moving lateral. Fourth, high elevation. By the time she hit the fifth, the tower behind her was silent again. Her movements weren't mechanical, they were alive. She flowed through the ruined village like smoke through cracks, each step synchronized to unseen rhythm. Garrett watched the biometric data spike and flatten in perfect cycles. Heart rate steady at 84, cortisol low, neural activity consistent. One of the observers muttered, "That's not human. Nobody stays that calm." Garrett didn't answer. He was too busy watching something else, the micro-adjustments in her movements, the way she anticipated not where the targets were, but where they would be. By the seventh target, she was 2 minutes ahead of schedule. Connors leaned forward, increased difficulty. Garrett hesitated. "Sir, she's already exceeding parameters." "Do it." The next target appeared earlier than protocol allowed. Then another, overlapping angles, 2 threats, 1 exposure window. Hayes shifted, rolled, fired. 2 shots, both hits. The crowd murmured. Someone whispered, "She adapted faster than the AI." 3 more targets dropped. Garrett's monitor beeped. "Sir, her vitals are dropping. She's calmer now." Connors frowned. "Lower how?" Garrett stared at the readings. "It's like the harder the test gets, the quieter she becomes." When the final target appeared, 170 meters moving, obscured by smoke, she paused for the first time. Just a second. Then she lowered her rifle slightly, exhaled, and whispered something that the mics barely caught. "Listen first." The wind shifted, carrying the faint clang of the target's chain. She fired once. The silhouette dropped. Total time, 5 minutes 12 seconds. Connors looked stunned. 5:12, impossible. Garrett turned to him. "You wanted repeatable, Admiral. There it is." The silence that followed wasn't celebration. It was realization. Garrett studied the biometric data again. "Sir, she's not reacting like a soldier. She's reacting like a musician. Rhythm-based cognition. She turns chaos into pattern faster than conscious thought." Connors stared down at the range where Hayes was lowering her weapon. "Then we're looking at more than instinct." Garrett's tone darkened. "You're looking at something the system can't replicate." When she returned to the observation deck, the applause she expected never came. Just eyes, calculating, curious, hungry. Connors greeted her with a neutral smile. "Outstanding performance, Lieutenant, again." She gave a crisp nod. "Thank you, sir." Garrett approached, tablet in hand. "Lieutenant, your neural data is remarkable. Do you mind if we schedule additional scans this week?" She met his gaze. "I mind." He hesitated. "Command will insist." "Then command can ask." Connors interjected. "You'll cooperate, Lieutenant. This could redefine training across multiple branches." She paused. "With respect, sir, you can't turn instinct into a formula. You can't teach silence." The Admiral's smile faded. "We'll see." She turned, saluted, and walked off the platform. Garrett watched her go, the wind tugging at her uniform, the ocean visible beyond the hills. "Sir," he said quietly, "if you push her any further, you're going to find out what happens when control breaks." Connors replied, "Then let's see what breaking looks like." That night, alone in her quarters, Hayes sat on the floor, the rifle across her knees. The rhythmic hum of the air conditioner filled the silence. She thought of the way Connors had watched her, not like a soldier but like a weapon. And for the first time in years, a tremor of unease crept beneath her calm. Not fear, not doubt. Something older, something every soldier who's ever been tested too far has felt. The quiet knowledge that some battles aren't fought with bullets. They're fought with identity. She looked down at her rifle and whispered, "They're not testing my aim anymore." Her reflection in the metal was steady. "They're testing who I am. What happens when a soldier realizes she's no longer being tested for skill, but for submission? The question lingered in Lieutenant Hayes' mind long after the sun set over the Pacific. Her room was silent except for the distant thrum of turbines and the occasional echo of footsteps in the corridor outside. The rifle sat on the desk in front of her, disassembled, gleaming under the dim yellow light. It wasn't the weapon she was studying. It was the reflection in its barrel, her own eyes, calm but questioning for the first time in a long while. They applauded her quietly that morning. No cheers, no ceremony, just silent stares and murmured words. Exceptional, unprecedented, a potential prototype for instinctive warfare training. But that word prototype kept echoing in her head. At 2200 hours, her comms unit chirped. Lieutenant Hayes, report to conference room 2A, priority level, immediate. She sighed, set the rifle aside, and rose. The corridors were colder at night. The hum of the lights above followed her like static. When she reached the conference room, Admiral Connors and Garrett were already there, along with two strangers in plain clothes. No insignias, no ranks, just posture. The kind of posture that came from people who gave orders without ever pulling triggers. Lieutenant Connors said, "Have a seat." She did. "This won't take long," one of the civilians began, his voice smooth, polished. "We're from the Strategic Applications Division. Your evaluation results have drawn interest from several departments. The way you process stress, the way you adapt to unpredictability, we've never seen patterns like it." Garrett slid a tablet across the table. On the screen, a set of graphs pulsed in rhythmic waves. "This is your neural response data from the Crimson Dagger simulation. You stayed in a near-ideal performance state for the entire duration. No adrenaline spikes, no fear response." Hayes studied the chart, and the civilian smiled faintly. "And that makes you valuable, Lieutenant. You represent a level of cognitive control we thought only achievable through artificial means." Connors leaned forward. "We're forming a specialized program, a unit designed to integrate instinct-based decision models into combat AI. We need operators who can work alongside the system during testing. You'd lead the field component." Hayes looked between them. "You want me to train computers?" Garrett hesitated. "To teach them, in a sense. The goal is to replicate your processing structure, rhythm, composure, intuitive engagement, and embed it into predictive combat algorithms." Her brow tightened. "So the system learns to think like me." "Exactly," the civilian said, smiling again. "Imagine it, fleets of unmanned systems capable of reacting with human intuition, without hesitation, without fear." She leaned back slowly, her silence louder than any argument. Finally she said, "You're not building soldiers, you're replacing them." Connor's voice stayed even. "We're evolving warfare. The world changes, Lieutenant. Machines don't question orders." Hayes' jaw clenched. "Maybe that's the problem." The words hung heavy. The civilian cleared his throat. "You'll have 2 weeks to prepare. Testing begins next month at the Nevada range. You'll oversee all operational trials. It's a major opportunity for you, for the Navy, for defense itself." Garrett watched her, quiet. He knew that look on her face, the same quiet rebellion she'd worn on the range, just before proving everyone wrong. Finally she nodded once. "Understood, sir." But her tone said something else entirely. The next morning she skipped breakfast and went straight to the range. The sun hadn't fully risen. The light was soft, half gold, half gray. She set up her rifle alone. There was no target sequence today, no stopwatch, just stillness. She fired once. Then again. Then again. The shots echoed across the hills like questions. No one wanted to answer. Garrett approached quietly from behind. Couldn't sleep either. She didn't look at him. "You knew what they were planning, didn't you?" He hesitated. "I suspected, but I didn't think they'd move this fast." "You should have warned me." He stepped closer. Would it have changed anything? Yes, she said, lowering her rifle. I'd have walked away. He studied her, his voice soft. You and I both know walking away doesn't stop them. It just removes witnesses. She turned to face him. Then what do you suggest? Let them turn instinct into algorithm. Let them erase the line between humanity and automation. He exhaled. Maybe that line disappeared a long time ago. Hayes shook her head. Not for me. Garrett looked down, conflicted. You know the data they're using, it's not just your shooting metrics. They recorded everything. Neural patterns, emotional responses, even your pulse variations when you hesitated before firing. She frowned. I didn't hesitate. He met her eyes. No, but your empathy did. Her stomach turned cold. They're mapping emotion now. He nodded. That's the real experiment. The AI won't just learn how to shoot. It'll learn when not to. The rifle in her hand suddenly felt heavier. Then they're not building a weapon. They're building a conscience, one they can control. Garrett's silence confirmed it. By noon, she was back in her quarters, packing. The envelope with her next assignment sat unopened on the table. Her thoughts looped like static questions of duty, morality, identity. A soldier obeys. A soldier serves. But at what point does obedience become surrender? The knock came again. This time it was Admiral Connors himself. Lieutenant, he said, mind if I come in? She didn't answer, but he entered anyway, closing the door behind him. You're troubled, he said, as if reading a report. I'm thinking, she replied. About what? About what happens when instinct becomes property. Connor's expression hardened. You misunderstand the scope of this project. It's not exploitation, it's evolution. You'll be remembered as the first to bridge humanity and precision. She met his gaze, unflinching. You're not bridging them, you're replacing one with the other. He took a step closer. Be careful, Lieutenant. This isn't defiance you're flirting with, it's insubordination. Her tone stayed calm. I've been called worse. Don't make this harder than it has to be, he said. You've built something extraordinary. Don't let sentimentality destroy it. She studied him for a long moment. Sentimentality is what keeps extraordinary from becoming monstrous, sir. He said nothing. The silence between them was sharp as glass. Finally, he nodded once. You're dismissed. He turned to leave but paused at the door. You know, Hayes, machines don't hesitate to pull the trigger. That's why they win. She looked up, eyes steady. Maybe hesitation is what keeps us human. That night she didn't sleep. She went back to the range again, this time without her rifle. She sat in the dirt where the targets used to stand, hands resting on her knees, breathing slow. The ocean wind carried faint echoes of the day, laughter from the barracks, orders from the loudspeakers, the hum of distant aircraft. The world moved on, unaware that someone somewhere was trying to teach machines how to feel. She thought of the men who'd once doubted her, the ones who'd laughed when she arrived at the range. None of them mattered now. The real battle wasn't between her and their disbelief anymore. It was between her and the system that wanted to own what made her human. Her mind drifted back to her old mentor, the sniper who'd taught her to listen before she fired. She could almost hear his voice in the wind. You can teach aim, you can teach speed, but you can't teach conscience. That either grows inside you or it doesn't. She whispered to the night, they're trying to grow it in code. The wind didn't answer. The next day, the experiment began. Rows of screens filled the control room. On one side, Hayes stood behind glass, observing. On the other, technicians ran simulations through AI-assisted targeting systems, using her data. On the monitors, holographic shooters engaged digital targets in real time. Their movements mirrored her own stance, breath, timing, eerily precise. Garrett adjusted the feed. We fed your patterns into the adaptive algorithm. Watch this. The virtual soldier pivoted mid-run. adjusted for wind, and fired with perfect accuracy. Connors folded his arms, 15 seconds faster than her average pace. Hayes' eyes narrowed, because it doesn't feel fatigue or fear or hesitation. That's the point, Connors said. Garrett frowned, but it also doesn't distinguish between simulation and reality. It just reacts. It doesn't choose. Connors ignored him. We can train that. No, Hayes said quietly. You can't train conscience. She turned from the glass. You can't manufacture humanity. Connor's tone sharpened. Watch your tone, Lieutenant. But she was already walking out. Garrett followed her into the hallway. You just made an enemy, you know that. She stopped. No, I just made a decision. What decision? She met his eyes. To remind them that instinct without morality isn't evolution, it's extinction. That night she packed, quietly, methodically, every movement deliberate. She didn't know what she would do next, not yet, but she knew what she wouldn't do. She wouldn't become the blueprint for a machine that never questioned itself. She wouldn't let her humanity be turned into data. Outside, the ocean wind carried the distant sound of training fire from the range. She paused by the door, whispering to the empty room. Sometimes, the hardest shot isn't the one you take. It's the one you refuse to. How do you walk away from something that's already memorized you? The transport plane lifted off from Oahu before dawn, the city lights shrinking into scattered stars beneath the clouds. Lieutenant Hayes sat by the window, duffel at her feet, orders in her hand, temporary reassignment, pending further instruction. On paper, she was leaving quietly. In truth, she was being watched. Garrett had slipped a folded note into her jacket before she boarded. No words, just a single coordinate scrawled in pencil and the phrase, "They're copying more than data." She hadn't needed to ask what that meant. By the time the plane touched down in San Diego, she already knew she wasn't heading to the new assignment listed on the form. She rented a civilian car at the airfield, changed out of her uniform in a restroom, and drove north toward the coordinate. The highway was empty. Her reflection in the windshield looked older than she remembered. She'd spent years mastering stillness, but this was the first time her hands trembled not from fear, but from knowing she was finally stepping outside the structure that had defined her entire life. At mile marker 217, the road turned inland toward an abandoned naval relay station. The sign was rusted, half buried in sand. She parked behind the shell of a radar dome and waited. Garrett arrived 20 minutes later in a beat-up Jeep. He stepped out, wearing sunglasses and a jacket too thin for the wind. "You're either brave or insane," he said quietly. "Depends on the day." He handed her a small flash drive. Everything I could pull before they locked the servers. Neural sync files, tactical mimic protocols, early deployment schedules. She turned it over in her fingers. Deployment. They're already testing the system at Fort Baker. Drone coordination. Simulated urban targets. Simulated. He looked away, for now. The silence between them was long, broken only by the wind whistling through the hollow tower. "I thought they just wanted to study instinct," she said finally. "They did," Garrett answered. "Then they realized they could weaponize empathy, predict mercy, suppress it, turn it off." Hayes stared at him. "You're saying they're teaching machines when not to care." He nodded, "And they used your hesitation data to do it." A sharp gust of wind blew sand against the car. She closed her fist around the drive. "Then I'm going to stop it." Garrett exhaled. "You can't fight the Navy, Catherine." "I'm not fighting the Navy," she said. "I'm fighting an idea." That night they drove to a safe house outside Monterey, an old fishing cabin Garrett had kept from another life. Inside, the floor creaked, and the smell of sea salt clung to the wood. Hayes plugged the drive into her laptop. Lines of code appeared, humming with quiet menace patterns of her own brain, converted into digital architecture. At the top of the file, Hayes Model A07, Behavioral Core V19. She scrolled through until she found what Garrett meant. Embedded in the algorithm were command lines labeled Ethical Override, Disabled BY Default. Her pulse slowed, cold and steady. They removed the failsafe. Garrett nodded. They're calling it an optimization. She leaned back, staring at the screen. They're stripping conscience out of the code. They say it'll make decisions cleaner, faster, fewer mistakes. Fewer humans, she muttered. Garrett watched her for a moment. If we leak this, it'll be classified treason. If we don't, it's complicity. He almost smiled. You really were the wrong soldier for them. Or the right one at the wrong time, she said softly. For 2 days, they worked in silence. Garrett traced network access points while Hayes combed through system protocols. Each file revealed something darker, simulation models already greenlit for live calibration exercises overseas. She found her name in a file header. Origin pattern, K. Hayes Neural Index, licensed for strategic use. It felt like reading her own autopsy. On the third night, thunder rolled in from the coast. Rain lashed the windows, and the room flickered with intermittent lightning. Hayes sat on the floor beside the open laptop, listening to the storm and the low hiss of the sea. Garrett looked up from his notes. We can't keep this here if they find us. They will, she interrupted, eventually. He hesitated. Then what? Then we make sure it doesn't die with us. How? She stared at the screen. By showing the world what they're really building. The storm passed by dawn. They left before sunrise, taking back roads north toward San Francisco. Every mile felt like borrowed time. At a roadside diner, Garrett bought 2 coffees and spread the map across the table. The Fort Baker facility's underground, he said. Data link runs through a military relay tower outside Sausalito. If we access the uplink, we can copy the raw neural files and leak them. Hayes sipped her coffee thinking, security. High, automated turrets, facial recognition, encrypted comms. She smiled faintly. Good thing I'm not planning to walk through the front gate. He looked at her. You've done infiltration before. She met his eyes. Once, in a place where no one was supposed to come out. Garrett folded the map. Then let's hope your instincts still work. They reached Sausalito by midnight. The fog rolled in thick, swallowing the road, the bay, the stars. The relay tower loomed ahead, a skeletal structure rising above a concrete bunker. Hayes adjusted her pack, her movements deliberate, calm. Garrett's hands shook slightly as he powered the laptop and connected a signal amplifier. Once you're inside, I'll patch the uplink through this channel. You'll have 5 minutes before they trace it. 5 minutes, she repeated quietly. I like that number. She pulled her hood up, moving through the mist like a ghost. The base perimeter lights flickered faintly in the fog, their sensors confused by the storm interference. She slid through the outer gate, hugging the wall until she reached the hatch leading into the relay control room. Her pulse stayed even, 3 strides per inhale, 2 per exhale. Inside, the bunker hummed with machinery. She located the terminal and inserted Garrett's transmitter. The screen came alive with lines of green code. Connection live, his voice whispered through her earpiece. Transmitting data, you've got 4 minutes. She watched the progress bar crawl upward. 32%, 46%, 71%. Then an alarm blared. Garrett, they found us faster than I thought. You need to. The line cut out. Footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. She pulled the drive free and slipped behind a console. 2 guards entered, scanning the room. Sector 4 breach, one muttered. Negative, the other said. Probably a sensor glitch. The system's still recalibrating. They left after a tense 30 seconds. Hayes exhaled, slow and soundless. The upload was incomplete, only 82%. but enough to prove what they were doing. She slipped out the same way she came, disappearing into the fog before the next patrol passed. Garrett's Jeep was gone. The dirt road was empty. She stood in the mist, rain dripping from her hood, scanning the dark. Then she saw it, a faint light flickering half a mile down the road. A crash. She ran. When she reached the wreck, the Jeep was upside down in the ditch, engine smoking. Garrett lay half-conscious beside it, blood streaking his temple. "They were waiting," he gasped. "Signal traced too fast." She crouched beside him, checking his pulse. "Stay still, I've got you." He grabbed her wrist weakly. "The data, did it upload?" "Most of it." He managed a faint smile. "Then finish it." Her throat tightened. "I'm not leaving you." "You already left once," he said, his voice fatting. "Don't do it again." She stayed with him until the lights appeared in the distance, black SUVs moving fast through the fog. Then she took the flash drive, pressed his hand once, and ran. She didn't look back. The road disappeared into the cliffs. The ocean roared below, dark and endless. She reached the edge where an old lighthouse stood, its beam long dead. Inside, the air was cold and wet. She found an old transceiver, half-rusted, half-functional. She wired the drive into it, connected the satellite relay, and powered it up. The generator coughed, then roared to life. Static, then connection. She typed one line. "Upload Hayes Model A07/destination. Public node/confirm." The progress bar began to move again. Outside, engines drew closer. Headlights cut through the fog. She waited until the upload reached 99%. Then she pulled the drive free and hurled it into the ocean. The sound of the splash was swallowed by waves. Moments later, boots thundered on the rocks outside. She turned, calm, breath steady. Connor stepped into the doorway, rain streaking his uniform. "You have no idea what you've done." Hayes met his eyes. "I stopped you from teaching machines how to forget mercy." "You leaked classified data," he said coldly. "You'll be court-martialed, imprisoned." She cut him off. "Maybe, but you'll spend the rest of your life explaining why an AI with my name almost learned how not to care." He stared at her for a long moment. "You think this changes anything?" She smiled faintly. "It already did." Outside, sirens wailed. The storm broke. The wind carried her words away. Sometimes defiance doesn't roar. Sometimes it whispers and keeps echoing long after the voice is gone. What does silence sound like when the truth finally speaks for itself? 3 days after the lighthouse incident, the world began to whisper her name. It started small, encrypted message boards, fragments of classified data surfacing on obscure defense channels. But soon the story spread wider. A prototype combat AI built from human neural data, a leak, a whistleblower. No one said her name outright. They didn't have to. Inside the Navy, everyone knew. Lieutenant Catherine Hayes was taken into custody at 400 hours, unarmed and unresisting. The men who came for her didn't speak. They didn't need to. She walked with them quietly, the same calm rhythm in her steps as when she'd walked the firing range. They placed her in a holding cell at Pacific Command, the same place she'd once been celebrated. The irony didn't bother her. Concrete looked the same whether it was a classroom or a cage. Hours later, the door opened. Admiral Connors entered, uniform pressed, expression carved from stone. "Lieutenant," he said evenly, "you've created quite the storm." She sat at the metal table, wrists resting loosely in the cuffs. "Storms clear the air, sir." He didn't smile. "You've leaked restricted data. You've compromised an active program that could have redefined warfare." "Redefined humanity," she corrected softly. "Don't start moralizing, Lieutenant. You disobeyed direct orders." "I obeyed the only one that mattered," she said. "And what order was that?" Her eyes lifted to his. "The one that says a soldier's duty is to protect life, not imitate it. Connor stared at her for a long moment, then sighed, packing the small room. You're intelligent enough to understand how naive that sounds. We're not living in a world where ideals win wars. I'm not trying to win wars, she said quietly. I'm trying to end the ones we keep creating. His step slowed. You leak data to the public, Lieutenant, to civilians who can't comprehend what they're seeing. You've jeopardized national security. National security built on erasing conscience isn't security, sir. It's surrender. The words hit the air like quiet gunfire. Connors finally sat across from her, leaning forward, voice lower now. Do you have any idea what they'll do to you? You'll lose everything: rank, pension, freedom. She tilted her head slightly. Freedom isn't what they give you, Admiral. It's what you decide not to trade. He looked away just for a second, then he stood abruptly. You'll have your hearing in 72 hours. I hope for your sake you find some humility before then. She smiled faintly. I already did, it's why I acted. He left without another word. The cell grew quieter after that. The hum of the lights faded into background noise. She spent the night awake, staring at the reflection of her own face in the small metal mirror on the wall. Her thoughts weren't of the trial ahead. They were of Garrett, his quiet voice, his steady conviction even as fear closed in. He hadn't made it out. She knew that now. His name hadn't appeared in any report. Somewhere buried in a database, he was a non-viable asset. But his last words hadn't left her. Finish it. She had. The world had the truth now. What they did with it wasn't hers to control. 3 days later, they brought her to the hearing room, no windows, 3 officers on the panel, 2 observers in civilian attire. The Navy didn't call it a court-martial. They called it a disciplinary review, as if language could soften consequence. Commander Vickers was there. She hadn't seen him since the range, since the day he'd told her she changed everything. His eyes met hers briefly. He gave the faintest nod. It was enough. The proceedings began with procedure, protocol violations, breach of confidentiality, unauthorized access. The list sounded endless. When they finally allowed her to speak, she didn't rise. She didn't need to. Her voice carried even and quiet. You want me to justify what I did, she said, but justification assumes I regret it. I don't. What I saw wasn't evolution. It was elimination, the removal of the very thing that separates precision from purpose. A captain leaned forward. You believe your moral judgment outweighs national defense strategy. I believe moral judgment is national defense, she replied. Without it, the flag becomes just a symbol painted on machinery. One of the civilians, the same liaison from before, adjusted his glasses. You disobeyed direct orders from superior officers. Yes. Why? Because sometimes the order is wrong. He frowned, and who decides that? She looked at him steadily. The person who has to live with the decision. Silence filled the room like a weight. Vickers spoke for the first time. Lieutenant Hayes, he said slowly, you've accused this program of unethical practice. Do you have evidence? She met his eyes. You've seen the data, sir. He nodded faintly. We have, it's been reviewed. That pause told her everything. They were burying it. She leaned forward. Sir, if they silence this now, what comes next won't just be unethical. It'll be unstoppable. The captain interrupted. Lieutenant, that's enough. But she kept going. We built weapons to win wars. Now we're building them to replace us. You think that ends with victory. It ends when we become irrelevant. The captain slammed the table. You are out of line. She didn't flinch. No, sir, I'm just out of patience. They adjourned after an hour. No verdict, not yet. They would deliberate internally, which meant privately, which meant safely. As the guards escorted her back toward her cell, Vickers walked beside her, silent for several paces. Finally, he said under his breath, You made them listen. She glanced at him. For how long? Long enough, he said. You planted doubt. Sometimes that's all it takes. She smiled faintly. Doubt is where conscience begins. He stopped at the cell door. You may never see what comes of this, Catherine, but I think you'll be remembered. She looked past him, out the narrow window where the Pacific shimmered in the distance. I don't need to be remembered. I just need to know someone else will remember why. Weeks passed. The world outside kept moving: military denials, news speculation, public debate. The AI project was quietly suspended pending review, though no one confirmed it aloud. Hayes remained confined but not forgotten. Letters began to arrive, first from anonymous addresses, then from soldiers, pilots, operators. Each said the same thing in different words. You reminded us what it's supposed to mean. She never responded, but she read every one. One evening, months later, Vickers visited again. He looked older, tired. The lines around his eyes had deepened. They're closing the case, he said. You'll be discharged, not dishonorably, but you'll lose your commission. No appeal. She nodded, expected. He hesitated. There's something else. The data you released, it didn't just expose the program, it started something. She looked up. What kind of something? Review boards, whistleblower protections. There's even talk of an ethics committee for autonomous defense projects. She smiled faintly. They're learning to hesitate. Because of you. She shook her head. Because of truth, it always finds its way through silence eventually. He placed an envelope on the table. When you're out, there's a letter inside. From someone named Garrett. He left it with legal counsel before the hearing. Her hand trembled as she picked it up. Vickers straightened. Whatever comes next, make it count, Lieutenant. She looked up at him. I already did. He smiled once, then left. The next morning they released her quietly. No ceremony, no salutes. Just a signed form and a final warning. Do not discuss classified material. She stepped out of the gates wearing civilian clothes, the Pacific wind in her hair. Freedom felt unfamiliar, not like victory, but like survival. She sat on a bench overlooking the base, opened the envelope, and unfolded Garrett's letter. His handwriting was shaky but clear. Catherine, if you're reading this, it means you did what I hoped you would, not obey, but act. I don't believe in heroes. I believe in people who stay human when the world tells them not to. Don't let them turn silence into shame. Silence is sacred when it protects truth. You reminded me that sometimes mercy is the bravest act of war. Ajay. Her eyes blurred for a moment. The paper trembled between her fingers. She folded it carefully, placed it back in the envelope, and sat quietly until the sun sank behind the horizon. That evening she walked down to the shore. The tide whispered against the sand, the air thick with salt and memory. She picked up a stone, turned it over in her hand, then threw it into the surf. The ripples spread outward, small at first, then wider, touching everything in reach. She stood there, watching them fade. No applause, no cameras, no medals, just wind and water carrying the weight of everything left unsaid. Somewhere in the distance, she could still hear echoes of gunfire, from a time when proving herself meant targets and timers. But that chapter was gone. Now her silence was the weapon. Because sometimes strength isn't loud. Sometimes it walks away quietly, leaving behind nothing but truth. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.